Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 3 of the We Coach podcast, presented by our partner, Huddle, on WIS Sports Radio. Huddle is leveling the playing field for women in sports, both through the technology they create and important events like Breakthrough Summit, co-created with We Coach. All podcast episodes are inspired by collective input from our We Coach community. Please join us every 2 weeks for thought-provoking discussions focused on timely topics of national significance impacting the coaching profession. I'll be your host, Vanessa Fuchs, CEO of We Coach, a one-of-a-kind nonprofit dedicated to offering year-round growth and leadership development to recruit, advance, and retain women coaches in all sports and levels. This podcast is a co-production of WIS Sports and We Coach. We look forward to bringing you new shows dropping every other Thursday. Well, I can't believe it's July already. The summer is flying by as usual. July is BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Mental Health Month, intended to highlight the unique mental health challenges and needs of historically disenfranchised or oppressed racial and ethnic groups in the United States. It's been absolutely tragic and heartbreaking to learn of the multiple collegiate student athletes across the country who have died over the past several months due to suicide. Our We Coach community stands with those families, schools, and communities that have been impacted and are mourning the loss of these young leaders. In light of the mental health crisis in college sports and to do our part to create awareness for BIPOC mental health, we wanted to dedicate both podcast episodes in July to this critically important topic. With me today are two guests, Megan Hankins-Maldonado, a former high school and collegiate women's basketball coach turned mental health professional, and Coach Michelle Bento-Jackson, head women's basketball coach of Cal Poly Humboldt, formerly Humboldt State University. Megan actually coached on Michelle's staff for 5 years before pivoting into her current career as an executive life coach, licensed marriage and family therapist, and mental health counselor. Thank you both for being here today. We're excited about the conversation.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you, Vanessa, for having us.
Absolutely. And Megan, I wanted to start with you. I'd like to just get your thoughts and your perspective. The current climate in college sports, what many are describing as a mental health crisis in college sports. And it's not just in athletics. Mental health and emotional well-being are critical issues impacting our society as a whole. And we certainly understand and recognize that college athletics is a pressure cooker. But then we've also had the pandemic, social injustices, the fight for equality for all people, gun violence, comparison syndrome from social media. And I'm sure I could list off several others. But Megan, you're a former college coach and college athlete, and I'd like to just hear your thoughts on what you've observed as the primary contributing factors to the crisis we're facing in sports.
Sure. I think that it's always been, mental health has always been something of a concern for athletics. I think now it's just had the platform to be out there to say that it's an issue. But I think it's been there for a long time. It's just something that we've never talked about. And I think all of the things that you just talked about, I think were maybe the things that brought mental health to the forefront, because the pandemic press pause for all of us to really maybe take a look at ourselves and look at the things that maybe we're kind of going through, that maybe we kind of say, we can just push that to the side and keep moving forward versus moving on. I talk a lot to my clients about that. I just want to move forward. Well, sometimes it's not healthy to just continue to move forward because you're not looking at what's going on right here in front of you to be able to move on. And so, my heart and my love goes out to anyone and everyone who has ever lost someone to suicide. It is not an easy thing to deal with as the person who is feeling suicidal, or the family members or coaches or friends that have lost a loved one, and how to process that grief when they decide, or if they decide to take their life. It is not easy on anyone. So my heart and love goes out to all that have lost someone.
Thank you for that, Megan. I personally have experienced the loss of a student athlete and a loss of a full-time staff member when I was at Florida State. And those memories still stay with me today of just how difficult it was to come to understanding, if there is such a thing, but also the support we were offering to the families and seeing the grief that they experienced after the loss of their child, after the loss of their family member. But I am grateful for the conversations that have been started. I hope this continues to prompt and advocate for change in college sports. I do think when I mentioned the pressure cooker, we talk about it often. It's a 24/7, 365 profession for our coaches. And I'd like to hear if you've got any thoughts on just the athletics environment, and how that contributes to maybe a higher rate or incidence of students who are students, coaches, and or administrators who are struggling with either depression or suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, it's a pressure cooker, and there's a really high, I would say high depression, high anxiety to perform, right? The pressure to win, the pressure to, because a lot of coaches, salaries are based on winning and losing, right? And so I think that if, we took that away, would that change the dynamic, right? Would that change maybe some of the administrators, like as far as putting pressure on their coaches to potentially win so that they can continue to have a job? It's probably like the most anxiety provoking job I think I have ever had, because it is I would call it a 25/8 job. There's never a quote unquote off time because your players could contact you if you needed something. Your administrators could contact you. Things could, happen all the time. And like Coach Bento and I, we have conversations all the time about, but what about us coaches? What about us that are dealing with the day to day, and who is asking us if we are okay? Right. And on how do we balance that? How do we, how can we be there for our student athletes, but also we need to be there for ourselves as coaches. But right now, like as far as creating that space, it's non-existent, one. And then two, there's not many potential professionals, mental health professionals that maybe have the experience of being a coach, because it's a very intricate job. It's a job like no other. And so if you maybe have never had the job, never done the job, potentially it's hard to understand what that is on a day-to-day basis. And I don't care whether it's high school all the way to Division I, there is some type of pressure. And then also too, you are on the front lines a lot for mental health, for their grades, you name it. There's so many things. And so you can't be an expert in everything. So who is going to be that sounding board for the coach when they have questions or when they are struggling with their mental health, right? They need to be allowed to say, I don't know, but let me have an expert help me, or let me find someone that can help you.
Vanessa, I'd like to chime in there if I could.
Absolutely.
One thing that comes to my mind, Vanessa, you mentioned an experience that you went through yourself with a student athlete and administrator. And I have not, as a coach, I have not gone through an actual situation where someone has unfortunately taken their life, but been close to those moments. And the thing I think about what you just said about your experience at Florida State was not only what Megan mentioned as to how is that coach doing, but one thing that comes to my mind is when we all signed up for coaching in this profession, and I've been in it for almost 30 years. We had no idea, that we were going to get to the point of the conversations that we are having now. And are us coaches truly even equipped to give the necessary guidance to these young athletes or administrators, whomever it is that we're working with, to how to help them and how to support them. And I've heard so many coaches say, I'm nervous about what to say. Everyone's, trying to protect ourselves from possibly a legality situation, but at the same time, providing the love and support to whether it be a coworker or to a student athlete. And so when we go through those moments, who's teaching us, on how to handle those situations? And that's something that I have found, not just with my own experience, but in talking to colleagues, that it's just not out there. And we're trying to go through this on our own, and we're not being coached, whether it be for our own selves personally and our emotions, or how can we help the individuals that we're working with to put them in the best situation for their own personal life.
Well said. And we're going to talk a little bit more about specific questions related to coaches focusing on their mental health. But Michelle, to your point of the education, training, and resources available for coaches, because I think, for me, I always encouraged our coaches when I was an administrator at Florida State to not necessarily take on all of these conversations yourself, but learn the skills. There's an art to referring these young people to the appropriate professional resources. And so I remember taking, it was called QPR training. Megan, I'm sure you've heard of that, but question, persuade, referral training. And it teaches you the appropriate language to use, the appropriate strategies to try to help refer someone who might be demonstrating signs that they may have a mental health concern to be able to refer them appropriately. And so we're also going to talk a little bit about some resources available, and I'm curious to hear your take on that later in the show. But Megan, I mentioned the language. Could you talk a little bit about what are some warning signs? We want to make sure our listeners are kind of learning some fundamental information related to mental health and emotional well-being. And so what are some warning signs? What is some appropriate language that you would suggest if you suspect or you observe someone who might need to seek out mental health services?
I created a document, and so if anybody is interested, please, contact me. But I've created a document that I did a talk with Jen Fry, which was an amazing opportunity, and talked about language around depression and suicidal athletes. And just to highlight a few, because I know, just want to give a little bit to people, is, asking the hard questions. I know that a lot of coaches, Coach Bento was talking about, as far as you're not potentially not equipped. And I don't think that you need to be, but I think you do need to have a couple of tools in your toolbox to be able to then make the referral. So asking the hard questions. Do you have a plan to hurt yourself? You are not putting that idea in their head. It is already there. If they say yes, then you stop and you get them the help that they need. That's the first thing I want to say, is sometimes you need to just cut to the chase and ask the hard questions. Do you want to hurt yourself? If you feel comfortable enough, you can ask, do you want to kill yourself? Do you want to cut yourself? You are not putting those ideas in their head. They have already been there. But after, if they say yes or no, or if they say no, but I have thoughts, I would still make the referral to mental health, right? Because again, that's the stopping point for a coach. This is out of what I would call scope of practice and needing to refer out. I think the next point I would say is validating their experience. It sounds like you got a lot on your shoulders. This must have been really, really hard if they're telling you things that are going on in their life. That must have been really hard for you to experience those things. Really feeling that you are hearing what they are talking about. The next one would be telling the truth on the next steps. Don't be sneaky. This is also a huge point, right? And I do this in my own practice with my clients, is that I let everyone know off the top is that, this is confidential unless you say you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to hurt someone else, or somebody else is going to hurt you. And then if you say those things, we potentially have to go down a different road. So things like, because you told me you want to hurt yourself, I need to get other people involved. And this potentially may invoke anger. And that's okay. You've got to sit with that, right? And again, it's about their safety. So if they're angry, if they're sad, it's sitting with them and saying, I only want to help you through this. Or if you're an assistant coach, we need to let the head coach know what's going on, right? I can't keep this information. I think that is huge to any coach, any head coach, assistant coach, dobos. You cannot keep this a secret. You cannot promise this athlete that you are going to keep this from anyone. This is not something you don't share. This is something that you share automatically. I realize you don't want this to happen, whatever these next steps are, but these are the next steps I need to take, to keep you from hurting yourself and to keep you from being to keep you safe. And lastly, I think it's important to thank them because you know what? This might be the first time they've actually said it out loud. So making sure I really appreciate you telling me this. And I do this a lot with my clients, even if it has nothing to do with suicide. But if it's a really hard thing that they're having to tell me, I tell them I appreciate how brave they were to let me in that way. It takes a lot. I know it was really hard to talk about said thing. I really appreciate you letting me know. I feel privileged that you feel safe enough to tell me what is going on, as I know that's not easy. So thank you so much. I think that goes a long way. And so then it makes them feel safe. And they know at the end of the day, whether they're mad, they're sad, that you took them seriously and the next steps will happen for them to keep them safe. I think that those, to be honest, the 4 things that I really think are really, really important. If coaches are interested, please reach out and I can send you this document of things to look out for. And just really making sure that, you are you are on the front lines. So making sure that, you have enough tools in your toolbox to know when to refer out.
Michelle, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I do. Again, going back to putting on my coaching hat, the things that Megan just mentioned as far as potential questions to ask. Let's just use our example as a student athlete. I guess you could say I was fortunate in this manner to have Megan on my staff, but I remember vividly the day that she told me, these are the type of questions to ask. And my jaw dropped. I was like, what? That's not appropriate for me to ask those questions. And obviously with Megan's background, and counseling and therapy, she knew those things. But what if I didn't have Megan on my staff? I mean, and I'm sure there's so many coaches out there that I personally would have never thought. I would have thought that I could have been, quote unquote, gotten in trouble for asking a question to a student athlete, such as, do you have a plan? I was flabbergasted by that. And again, going back to educating us administrators and coaches on how to handle those situations as compared to someone comes in your office and maybe, tells you something very serious rather than, okay, go to the resources on campus. But finding that balance between showing the love and support for our student athletes, because that's what we're all here about, and helping them, but yet giving them the right tools. And I'll always remember when Megan told me that, and she kind of took the lead on asking those questions, because we have gone through some situations together and supporting our student athletes. And I would have never dreamed that those were questions to be asked.
Yeah. Michelle, we heard similar themes. We just came back from our Women Coaches Academies in Denver. We had about 60 women coaches there on site. And I can tell you, mental health and how coaches best support these young people and how to best have these conversations came up over and over and over. And so I wanted to ask Megan, because obviously, Megan, you've been a coach, you've been in their shoes, you've been a student athlete. I think your background is so unique, and I'm really excited to get you more involved as a resource for our We Coach community. Megan, you founded the Rec Center, which stands for Reflect, Evolve, and Conquer. And you described your work as helping others to find balance, when and how to say no, how to set boundaries, how to recharge. My favorite is what you said on one of the first Zooms that I listened to, that you were a participant. You take therapy and counselor speak and turn that into coach speak. So can you talk a little bit about the services you offer to coaches and student athletes? And to Coach Bento's point, are you available as a resource for further education for coaches who are wanting to learn more?
Yes. To answer your question, yes, I am. Because I was just thinking about, what Coach B was talking about. And I was thinking, there's so much training. I remember as a coach, we'd have to go through training to drive, training for sexual misconduct, training for concussion protocol, right? But there is no training, at least in my experience as a 15-year veteran basketball coach from all levels, that I had for mental health, right? I was a part of the Positive Coaches Alliance when I was coaching at the high school level, but not much was talked about with mental health, right? And I can remember 2 of my athletes at the high school level, one was potentially suicidal and one was cutting. And if I didn't have the background in mental health, I don't know how those young people would have gotten help. right? I'm not trying to say I'm the best because I know I'm not, and I have so much more to learn. And I know there are other colleagues out there, which are few, that have the same type of background that I have. But it's so, so important that there needs to be more training so that coaches from all levels have the tools for all things, not just suicide and depression, but anxiety, eating disorders, mood disorders, things that are showing up that coaches are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And we're not talking about it, right? It's the elephant in the room. But we talk about it when things are happening, and then it kind of goes away because we focus back on what we actually are there for. But it's a really big thing that we need to start having training. So yes, I'm a resource. I coach coaches, through executive coaching. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. So I have clients that I see for therapy. And I really want to get more involved with universities, with different programs, with whoever that feels that, really, really wants more education around mental health. And I think, like what you said, I had a hard time when I was in grad school because sometimes therapy can really be like heady and using lots of big words that even I was like, I don't know what that means. And so for me, it was really nice to kind of translate what that means and put it in, layperson speak, right? Or in this instance, coaches speak. I speak coach. I know what it is to be a coach. It doesn't matter what sports you play or what sports you coach. We all have something in common as far as like how we do the job and the amount of time it takes to do the job well. And so I think that it's taking psychology and putting it in terms that coaches can understand and coaches can apply. It's the same thing I do with my clients. I take what I know from psychology and I put it in a way that people can understand. I take that from my dad because my dad talked a lot of metaphors, and I use a lot of metaphors in the way that I teach and the way that in the way that I coach. When I was a head coach, I would take the whole and break it down and then teach the whole again. And then, being Michelle's assistant, like she's very similar in how she teaches and coaches the game. So I take those things from what I've learned as a coach, I apply them as a therapist, as an executive coach to help others really understand what's going on for them on the inside, and then potentially how do they help their athletes, or how administrators potentially can help their coaches.
Well, our We Coach community welcomes you with open arms, Megan. We are so excited to have you pour into our women coaches, and excited to also have you in July with our high school academy coaches, sharing the importance of the focus on coaches and their mental health. In addition to you as a national expert and resource, I'm curious to hear from both you and Coach B if there's other resources that you would recommend. I know at Florida State, we had a full-time mental health specialist, full-time working in our athletics department, supporting our student athletes. The problem was she was supporting over 500 student athletes, but she would provide education annually to our coaches. We also had a campus counseling center. And so I was just curious, both within athletics or on your campus or within your community or even nationally, if there's resources out there that you would recommend coaches turn to for that support that Coach B is mentioning, because it's certainly in our We Coach community a topic of constant conversation. It is literally on the minds of our entire membership.
I think that's a really good question. I know that, I've seen a lot on Twitter, and I've seen, where coaches are really asking the NCAA to really step up in this way of kind of putting some type of training together in this manner, right? And I don't know if it exists on the athletics, world. I mean, I know that there are different trainings that I go to as far as like how to be a better therapist, but like as far as like those trainings to be applied to said universities, I know that there are a lot of on-campus resources, especially at the D1 level, that have their mental health professionals putting on different trainings for their coaches and their administrators, which I think is great. But let's be honest, Division II, Division III, NAIA, high schools, AAU programs, those resources are not the same. And so it's really trying to make it equitable that everybody gets the same education so that this is something that is the same as if we were to get concussion training or sexual misconduct training. It's all the same across the board. And I think there needs to be more. The one resource I do want to give is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. If you are feeling suicidal and you do not have a therapist, please, please, please use that number, reach out. But I think there needs to be more out there. I'm currently trying to work on some programming myself to be a resource to those programs, and with We Coach as well. I'm super excited about, working in July and trying to put either groups together or some trainings together about how to bring psychology to the sports world, like how to explain what anxiety looks like, what they're seeing, how they're experiencing as a coach themselves, or potentially what they're seeing from their student athletes. Or if you had a kid that had an eating disorder, how do you deal with that? Again, coaches are seeing mental health show up in their programs and feeling ill-equipped. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different coaches from a lot of different levels and feeling really like just not unable to potentially help their student athletes in the way that I know that they want to. And potentially, but then the other thing too is some resources are there. They might, like you were talking about, Vanessa, there's one therapist for potentially 500 student athletes. Or if there's not even a mental health professional that's with the athletic community, there might just be 5 for the entire university for some levels. And so it's really, really difficult. I know that some universities are using online platforms to potentially help with this situation, which is great. But then it comes to the point of, do these mental health professionals understand what student athletes go through on a day-to-day basis? And that's the other thing that I've had conversations with different athletes of, yeah, I have a therapist. Yeah, I have a life coach, but they don't really understand my sport. And I spend more time explaining what I do than really talking about the issues I'm there for. And I've had that conversation with coaches and student athletes. So it's great having the mental health professionals, but it's also having the right fit for that specific community, for coaches and for athletes.
And that's why I'll add to that is, again, going back to resources, that's why Megan and I have spoken endlessly just about people such as herself who have the unique background that Megan has. Because I'm certainly, with all due respect, all the resources that our universities provide us, but athletics is a different beast. And it's just so many different components that come into play with our student athletes and our coaches on what we deal with on a day-to-day basis that we need more people such as Megan or a Joanne McCallie, people that have gone through these situations themselves, whether it be an athlete or a coach, and have a little bit more of an understanding of what goes on from a day-to-day basis. And it's lacking in our profession. And I'm not just speaking about basketball in my sport, but in all sports as a whole. And again, as Megan also said, just the different, it's a shame that financial resources are what is potentially stopping universities at the D2, D3 level to provide this type of care to our athletes. And it just seems so wrong that because we have to provide, we're losing lives to student athletes, and we have to be better. We have to do more from us coaches, from our administrators, from upper administration at the universities to provide more for these student athletes and coaches.
And if I could piggyback off of you, Coach, is that I think, coaches are head coaches, right, are the leaders, right? And I think if head coaches think something's important, it will be important for their entire program. And so there's a lot of stigma around mental health. And that, for different reasons, culturally, men and men of color, it's not something that they potentially reach to first as a resource. But if said head coach is like, no, we all need to make this a priority, then it will be a priority. But if said head coach is like, there's this resource, you guys can use it if you want to, but it's really not that important, then it won't be that important. So our whole thought process around mental health has to change and it has to be important. It has to be important in order for us to start seeing change in athletics and making it something that student athletes or coaches feel comfortable about speaking out loud about. I'm not okay. And it's okay for you not to be okay. And here are the resources, to help you.
Well, We Coach certainly wants to be a go-to resource for this topic because I've heard over and over from our women coaches, this is a significant concern for them, knowing where to turn for resources so they can best educate themselves to position themselves to be able to then best lift up and support their student athletes. The NCAA does have multiple written resources on their website, but as far as national experts, presenters and speakers with the proper credentials to speak on the topic of mental health and emotional well-being, we're going to continue at We Coach to identify those experts like you, Megan, and continue to connect them with our We Coach community. And again, we can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing to offer that support for our coaches. It is BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month. And Megan, I wanted to ask some specific questions here so that coaches and administrators understand specific to Black, Indigenous, and persons of color, how to best support those student athletes. What are some factors that we may not think about, particularly as a white ally, that impact the mental health of our student athletes of color? And what are some best practices or advice that you would offer to support those students?
I saw this question and it really, I thought a lot about it because, you had mentioned also that the Delaware State women's lacrosse team being racially profiled on a traffic stop in Georgia as an example. And it really brought up a lot of emotion because I am a woman of color. I'm half Black, half white. My husband is half Mexican, half white. And so we have multiracial children. And the helplessness that coach felt being in that type of position is just unreal. And that, Coach Jenkins, she had said, if this was Coach K, this would have never happened. And I had to sit with that for a while because they're right. And that it wouldn't, and that there is assumed positive intent in this country if you are a white male. And, anyone else, BIPOC, a female, LGBTQ, it's already a negative, assumed negative intent. And, I can give some even personal examples. My family, we were on the road and we were going through a small town and we were being pulled over. And we were going the speed limit. So my husband and I were really kind of like, this is weird. And so we're waiting. We pull over to, and here we are. We're pulling over in a public place because, we are people of color and we're nervous. And so the officer gets out, who is Hispanic, and starts screaming at us, roll down your window, roll down the back window. And we're both looking at each other like, why? And our son, who at the time is 4, Mommy, why is he yelling at us? Mommy, why is he yelling at us? And, my husband is just like, I'm not rolling down my window because I didn't do anything wrong. But the mother in me is like, please roll down the window because I don't want him to shoot our children in the back seat because his gun was drawn. And it was very, very scary. We're explaining that our children are in the back seat. And he slowly creeps up and we're obviously angry. And we're like, what's the issue? And he said, you have expired tags. I just was floored because I thought to myself, if this was a white male or a white family traveling across the country, it's assumed positive intent. And that automatically looking at us, you already assumed that we were somebody of a threat. And I will never forget my child's face. And I think, that brings up a lot of emotion because I think that a lot of my white colleagues that are coaches or therapists, like, don't understand, like, people, like, so if I bring it back to the student athlete, there are a lot of student athletes that come with that experience. So then if they get a professor, a white professor that potentially is already assuming negative intent about certain things versus their white counterparts, you know, it's very jarring. It's very scarring. It's, you know, and you're, you know, we have to teach our young boys at young ages. I mean, my son is 4 and having to deal with that. Another example is, you know, in school, he was in school and he yelled at an adult, and this administrator said that they were afraid that he was going to become violent. He's 4. I don't think the same administrator is saying the same thing about white boys and girls that are in this same institution. And so to me, it's like, you don't want to pull the race card, but the race card is always pulled out on us. And so to me, it's like, I want to assume that people are giving me the benefit of the doubt, but sometimes it's in the back of my own mind. So I think to my colleagues that are people of color, I know that this is something that they also have encountered. And then also thinking about, you know, we're doing a better job of trying to hire more people of color, but the higher you go, the less you see of administrators of color. I can remember being maybe one of 2 people of color that were head coaches. I can think of institutions that I was maybe 1 or 2 people of color in the entire athletic department. And this doesn't mean it's just in rural America. This is also in predominantly white institutions that are in big cities. That a coach potentially may be the only person of color on the staff, right? And so then where, you know, what does that mean? How does that feel? Then how do, you know, having those athletes, you know, turn to that one coach and having all those shared experiences. And then the higher you go, like, who do people turn to, right? You know, I can think of one time where the president, the administrators, and at that time, the athletic director were all people of color. That only happened one time in my whole career of coaching. And so I think that you know, and this is happening across the country. So I don't think my experience with my family or with my son is unique. But when you ask me, those are the things that student athletes, coaches, and administrators have to think about. It's an added thing that they have to think about that my white counterparts potentially may not. If they don't have children of color or they're not married to a person of color, that they don't have to think about, they don't have to talk about. And I would talk about that with my son's teachers. We are having to have a whole nother lesson on top of learning numbers and letters to our 5-year-old son, that I'm sure his little friends are not having to have those same conversations. And then for me, having to go to work and having that on my mind, you know, that's an added thing that's, you know, wanting to keep my children safe. And that, you know, when did my son become a threat? He was cute at 5, but now, you know, at 15, 16, he's a threat. All those things I think compile, right? And then again, just being cognizant of those experiences and giving them space to be able to, for people to be able to share and to be able to process that pain for themselves.
One thing that comes to my mind is, you know, we talk about people of color, and whether it be a coaching staff, whether it be an administrative, again, I'm referring to athletic departments, and how many people of color, both men and women, are in these positions. And I think back on during COVID and during Black Lives Matters and the conversations, and I sat in numerous Zooms with African American men and women that are in the coaching profession and sharing their stories. And I think back on that and I think, you know what? There were no administrators in those Zooms. It was just coaching, and it was an opportunity for coaches to tell their stories, which was phenomenal. But where is the administration? And again, who is providing the support to these, in this case, people of color going through just horrific situations in society and in their own personal lives, very similar to the experience that Megan just shared, and who's providing that support to them? And in order to do that, You have to have people that can possibly relate to you. So are we hiring people of color in upper administration positions, whether it be staffs or administration? And I think that's a key factor both for men and women. And we have to provide in all ways. And I mean, hearing, I can speak of our team here also, and Megan was with me at the time. The African-American young women who we had in our team and that were going through such emotional times in their life, and the white individuals on our team not understanding what that meant. And they were going through depression and anxiety and just so incredibly emotional. And we had to have very, very transparent, open conversations within our team. And sometimes tears were shed and anger was expressed. But in my opinion, those were much needed conversations. And I think it was beneficial to both the white student athlete, the African Americans, people of color. But what saddens me, Vanessa, to be honest with you, is I feel like those moments took place during Black Lives Matters. My question would be, how many of those conversations are still taking place? How many, and I'm going to say coaches, whether it be post on social media or had conversations with their team during that time, but what has continued? This is an everyday thing. This is a life thing. This is not just a fad, as I say. This was not just, are we still having those conversations? Are we still checking in this case, with people of color, and how are they doing? Are we naive to think that those situations still don't exist? They happen every single day. And, are we having those conversations? And that's where I feel like we're missing the boat. And I get really discouraged and I get frustrated. I mean, even here, Megan and I started a few different things when we were coaching to provide for our student athletes, to provide for administrators. And I get discouraged when I feel like that's just gone by the wayside now. That's on the back burner. And I can only speak of my own experiences. I hope this isn't the case across the country to the extent that I'm speaking of. But we have to do better. We have to have these conversations. We have to know communication. And if we don't have these conversations, we're never going to get educated to know how we can provide the support and love for individuals that need it.
Well said. Well said. I want to first thank both of you for sharing your direct experiences and making yourself vulnerable to share those experiences so that we can learn and draw understanding. We coach, we want to continue those conversations. And there's so much here in this podcast that we've been able to touch on. And we could probably spend another hour, discussing some of these critical issues, but from mental health to systemic hiring practices to the lack of representation, at the highest levels and all levels of athletes. It's not just in coaching. And certainly we exist to serve and elevate women coaches, but we see some of these challenges. There are many. But what we strive to do with We Coach is not only discuss these challenges and continue to raise the awareness and continue these conversations, but then also offer some strategies to help our coaches and our administrators best navigate those challenges. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask Michelle, I enjoyed reading up on some of the initiatives that you have done as a head coach. I read about your Race for Change community service project that you did with your team, and that you had collected donations for Humboldt's African American Center for Academic Excellence. What are some other ways and examples that you think might be beneficial for coaches to think about, not only as you go about supporting the experience for your student athletes, but also the experience for your coaching staff and the support staff that's a part of your Humboldt's program? What are some initiatives that you implement? What are some things you intentionally do and think about for your student athletes, coaches, and support staff that enhance their experience and maybe their satisfaction of their job, but also in many ways impact their well-being as individuals working in athletics?
Sure. First, in regards to the Race for Change, I do need to give a lot of credit to UCSD and Heidi Vanderveer. They kind of actually initiated that cause and that event. And Megan and I, we absolutely jumped on board right away as we felt that it would be extremely beneficial in many ways. And yes, we got our team involved and we did that event, which was tremendous. And again, just trying to get the word out really in our community. And our community here in Humboldt County is a pretty small community, but we wanted to not only in the basketball world, but specifically our community. And, as I mentioned a few moments ago, Megan and I were both also a part of, along with our track and cross country coach, we started just basically a Sunday conversation with the African American student athletes here in our department. Again, just to give them a safe space for them to share and to speak on whatever the case may be, whether it was something in society, whether it was their experience here at our university, being an African American student athlete. It was just kind of an open forum. And along with, we have started what we call SEA, which is social equity, and accountability. And actually just recently I have connected with our VP for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I had her she has a phenomenal background and experience. And I had her speak to all of our student athletes. So about a month ago now. And it was tremendous. I mean, she talked about, I think she called it the art of mindful inquiry and how to handle conversations and some of the things that us as coaches, can ask. For example, what I heard you say was, or what angered you about this, and just giving us all feedback. And when I say us, one thing Megan and I again talk about a lot is it's our student athletes, but our coaches have to be trained. Our coaches have to be educated. Think about the white coaches who are dealing with predominantly athletes of color. Do they know how to handle these situations? Do they know what type of conversations to have? Are they conveniently avoiding conversations that are necessary to help in the growth and development of our student athletes and for mental support? Are those things even happening? And so to have these open forums for discussions, that was one thing that was really important to us to try to get, not just within our own team, but really through our department, to educate everybody. Because, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but I do think conversations are conveniently not happening. And I say that because individuals, in particular white individuals, don't know how to stem the conversation, don't know how to start the conversations. And so it's avoided, whether it be because we're uneducated, whether it be because everybody is always, I hear coaches say all the time, I got to protect my own butt, so to speak, and not sure, everybody's so nervous on exactly what words are coming out of our mouths. And are we going to be held accountable for something that we had good intentions on, but maybe it came out in a disrespectful way. So we've done a variety of things, Vanessa, and again, right now, my thoughts are these things have to continue. And I know we do it within our team, and we're making steps here with our department and our university, and our upper administration is making this a priority at our university. And I think a lot of universities across the country are. I just want to make sure that they continue, that they're genuine conversations and not conversations because one feels that's your duty. I feel like that's disingenuous. This has to be real, open, transparent conversations. And I wish, yes, I have my department here, but just coaches across the country. And again, in all sports, just having an opportunity for us all to share. We all go through so many things on how to handle things, and we can all learn from each other. And it's just such, your organization, We Coach is huge. And when Megan first told me about you and I read up on your organization, I was excited because of the services that you're providing and the conversations that are having. And we just have to continue to do more and more.
Thank you, Coach B. And we're just getting started. This is month 3 for me at We Coach, and I've really, really enjoyed the work, but I've been moved. I've been moved by the honest feedback each time I have conversations with our coach community, asking what their needs are, what their concerns are, how we can best meet those needs, how we can best support them. I've been really encouraged. There's so much important work ahead for us, but certainly this is one topic, the many that we've discussed here on this podcast that we want to continue to address. And, again, we could go on for quite some time. We've touched on so many great, discussion items, and what I like to do is conclude each podcast with the same question. We coach, we exist to help move the numbers in terms of increasing and supporting women coaches in all levels of sport. And what's your advice for continuing to move those numbers and continuing to build more women coaches in all sports and levels?
Well, I think you have people, and I'm not just referring to women that are now getting their foot in the door in men's sports, but just in general. I mean, we have some, the Becky Hammonds, the Lindsay Gottliebs. We have, there's a list of women who are really kind of paving the way, and in my opinion, just giving other women the courage and the strength and the confidence to go for it, basically, to apply for those higher positions. And, I think, to be honest with you, Vanessa, it's disheartening to hear the decline of women coaching now, but I think a lot of things that we're talking about today play a part in this. And I've heard so many coaches say, they're stepping away from the game for a number of different reasons. And so I don't know if it's so much that the positions aren't available. It's the position itself and providing the support for the coaches. I've heard coaches tell me that, in correlation to mental health, that, it's an NC2A Sweet 16 game and their best player wasn't playing because she needed a mental health day. And I think about that, and I think we have to provide the support for that student athlete. There's no question about it. But as well as I do also that at that level, those coaches are held, their livelihoods is on their win-loss record. And where is that balance for the coaches, the pressure to win and lose? And here we are in one of the biggest games that could affect my contract, could affect my future. And my best, quote unquote, best player isn't participating in that game. How do we handle that? How do we still encourage coaches to want to stay in this profession when these type of things are taking place? It's discouraging, folks, to be honest with you. It's at least from my experience and colleagues that I have spoken to, these are some of the examples that I've been given as to why, and I'm going to specifically say women, why women have stepped away from the game. And that's heartbreaking. I mean, they've spent their life in this profession, and it's some of these obstacles that are, quote unquote, pushing us women out the door. And I think it starts, obviously from the very top, but we have to have more conversations. One last thing I want to touch upon is look at how many situations across the country where coaches are getting fired. And I'm not just referring to win-loss records. I'm referring to a lot of different situations that take place. And once again, where is the support for those coaches that are going through very, very difficult situations, possibly with their own student athletes? Where's that support for them? Coach told me many years ago we should start a coaches group just to give the support, because so many individuals at some point in your time, you're going to go through an adverse situation in your coaching career. And how do we continue to provide the support for those coaches that want them to continue to stay in this profession? It's $1 million question that I'm asked all the time. And I think things of that nature will give the confidence for women to want to stay in this profession.
Yeah, Coach, I 1,000% agree with you. And I think another thing that is also, I think for me was important to work for Coach B was that she is a mom. And I think, we've seen it across the country, regardless of job. Women in the workplace has declined drastically due to childcare. And women getting out of coaching because, whether head coaches that they work for, it's not, there's no space for a coach to potentially have a family, or, administrators not potentially, making that same concession. And so people are having to choose their families over potentially what they love to do. And it's a lot more women having to make that concession. And I have to say, working for Coach B, I was a new mom. Funny enough, I took the job, and then days later I found out I was pregnant, and Coach B was like, "Oh, congratulations!" Trying to do the math of like, okay, so are we going to be in postseason or what? And so it was really cool to have her support as a young mom, as a coach that was trying to make it work, because like I said before, this job does not stop. Just because I went to practice and came home, I still got to make recruiting calls. And then, by the way, I got to make dinner, and then I got to change a diaper, and then I got to put a kid down, and then I probably have to call another recruit. And then potentially I'm texting, coach at night, So to me, you got to have a partner that's understanding. because there's so many sacrifices that I think women make as coaches, and that they're also their partners make that is not talked about. And so I think for me and my personal experience, like without Coach B, being just the rock that she was for me. I mean, she was there when both of my children were born. She, allowed, not allowed, but I just was like, hey, I want to go to my kid's first swimming class. She was like, go. And vice versa. When she, her son is in basketball and, hey, Megan, I need you to run practice. Okay. So, having support from administrators down with women wanting to have families and not having to get out of coaching because they want to do that, I think is so, so important. And having people that will, include the family. My children love Coach. And they were around a lot. And, if I had stayed, I'm sure this year, my son, who's going to be 6, would probably have been on the bench. I mean, Coach B's son's on the bench. So, I think working for someone who is who's family first and has those priorities set to her players as well. I think it's, trying to find, people that are family first to work for, if that is your priority, so that we can keep more women in the game and they don't have to choose family over what they love to do.
Well said. And you both touched on a couple more topics that I continue to hear over and over from our women coaches. Women around the country being fired for abuse and harassment in the program, allegations. Support for mothers in coaching, another big topic. I was just on the phone with a coach last week, helping to support her as she was trying to work with her administration to ensure that her young child got to travel with the team when she's away for 4 and 5 days for team travel.
Right.
Support for women in coaching. We're working on a toolkit right now as part of our 50th anniversary Title IX resources that is going to be shared here soon, that helps give administrators, sport administrators, athletics directors best practices for how they best support women in coaching. And a lot of these topics that we've touched on throughout this podcast will be included in there. But I can't thank you both for your leadership and the work you do to not only lift up our next generation of leaders, these student athletes that you work with, but also to help support these coaches who they need the support. And so, Coach B, I can't thank you enough for your leadership of how you support your staff and promote an environment where there is some semblance of balance, integration, harmony between the very busy job of coaching and the work that, and their lives at home. And Megan, thank you so much. For you to pivot out of coaching and now be able to serve coaches and student athletes in another very powerful and impactful way. Just thank you for what you do, and thank you for the time that you've committed to We Coach. Again, just can't thank you both enough for being on the show today. For you listeners, thank you for listening to episode 3 of the We Coach podcast. We're going to continue this conversation. Like Coach B said, we're going to continue this conversation. Part 2 of our mental health series dedicated to BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month will come out July 28th. And so we encourage you to tune in for that conversation as well. And you can follow us and share your comments on Twitter at WeCoach and at WIS Sports, or on Facebook at WeCoach Sports and at WIS Sports. Interested in learning more about any of our upcoming events, resources, membership, and donor options, please visit our website at wecoachsports.org. And until next time, keep moving the numbers. We teach, we inspire, we motivate, we lead. We coach.